Hi, this video is an introduction to the web application NetChecklist.com. NetChecklist.com is an internet-based task management application that focuses on creating and using checklists. I created it to manage and implement business processes in the real estate and construction businesses that I own, but it's a completely generic application. It lets you create your own checklists, so it can be used for any type of checklist. It runs in any web browser, so you don't need another app taking up memory on your smartphone or tablet. And because it's a computerized application, it can do things that just can't be done with paper checklists. Basically, the application allows you to document your processes in the form of checklists. And the advanced features of the application that we're going to talk about in this video allow you to document your processes much more thoroughly and make your checklists far more usable for you and your team, and as well as much more effective in making sure that your processes are actually followed exactly as you've defined them. So in the application, you first create your checklists, and a checklist can have an unlimited number of individual tasks on it. Now, the tasks on a checklist are not on the actual task list. A checklist is just a template, like a master copy of a paper checklist that only gets used by making copies of it. The checklist can be copied over and over again very, very easily. And when a checklist is copied, the application automatically adds all of the tasks from the checklist to the task lists of whichever members of your organization you assign the items to. So no one ever has to waste time typing the things that need to be done into the computer, and none of the important steps in a process get forgotten. And you'll no longer be depending on yourself and all of your team members to simply remember everything that you need to do every single time. In the application, managers can check at any time to see what has and hasn't been done by each member of the organization, so everyone is much more accountable. This actually allows managers to spend less time training their team members on everything that they're supposed to be doing, and then constantly reminding everyone of it, and then retraining everyone whenever changes are being made. And managers can instead invest their time into refining and improving their processes so that their entire team can operate more effectively and efficiently. But that's actually just the beginning. In this video, I'm going to talk more about what the application does and 7 more features of it that allow you to document your processes in a way that's more thorough, usable, and effective. The application also helps you and your team work more efficiently in at least 8 different ways. I don't have time to go into detail about all of these in this video, but one important way that it does help you work more efficiently is that because with the application, each of you will see the exact tasks you need to complete on your task list. You'll spend less time having to think about what it is that you need to do, and writing out to-do lists and rewriting to-do lists and worrying about what you might have forgotten to do, and cleaning up messes when you or someone who works for you forgets to do something that's important. And instead, you can just focus on getting your work done. So the application starts by grouping everything into organizations. An organization can be a business, a charitable or religious organization, a sports team, a civic or government organization, whatever. An organization can have an unlimited number of members, and each member of an organization can have a different level of user rights within that organization. You can also be a member of multiple organizations using a single login account, so there's no need for you to create a separate login account for each organization that you need to be a member of. Next, in the application, you create different projects within your organization. Now, what a project is for you depends on what your organization does. If you're a home builder, then a project would be a house that you're building. If you're a realtor, then a project would be a house you're listing for sale or a buyer you're helping to purchase a home. If you're an accountant, then a project would be a client that you're doing work for, whether that's a business or an individual. A project can be something that you start and finish, like a house that you're building, or it can be something that's ongoing, like the client of an accounting firm. Now, the tasks on a checklist that are not yet on the actual task list cannot be assigned to any project. Remember, a checklist is like a master copy of a paper checklist that you just make a copy of each time you start that process for another project. All of the tasks on the task list, however, are always assigned to a specific project. Next, let's talk about user assignments. That's the first of the 7 additional features I want to talk about in this video. You set up each of the individual tasks on your checklists so that they'll be assigned to whichever different members of your organization you want them assigned to each time you make a copy of the checklist. And there are actually 3 different ways that you can set that up. Because of the way the application assigns tasks to the different members of your organization, each person will only see the tasks assigned to them whenever they log into the application. So no one ever has to waste time going through a long list of items on a checklist just trying to figure out if there's anything on that list that they need to do. This is one of the most important ways that the application documents your processes in a way that's more usable for you and your team members. As I already mentioned, the managers of an organization have the ability to check at any time to see what has and hasn't been done by any member of the organization. Now, you can assign a task on a checklist to a specific member of your organization. And when you do that, that task will be assigned to that person every single time you make a copy of that checklist. There are, however, times when you're going to need a little bit more flexibility. Say you have a checklist that you use for a sales process, and you have tasks on it that need to be assigned to the salesperson. But you have 5 salespeople in your organization, and each time you copy that checklist, you really need to be able to assign those tasks to whichever salesperson is working on that transaction. Well, there is a way to handle that very, very easily, and there's actually even a 3rd way you can handle user assignments that I don't have time to cover here, but I will in another video. So the second of the 7 additional features I want to talk about is what I call task dependencies. Task dependencies are for times when a task cannot be done until another task or tasks have first been completed. You set up task dependencies on your checklist, not on tasks that are already on the task list, so they too become part of the documentation of your processes. When a checklist containing dependencies is copied, all of the dependent tasks are marked inactive when they're added to the task list. So they won't show up on the task list of whoever they're assigned to until all of the tasks they're dependent on have been marked complete and they're activated by the application. When your processes are documented using other methods, there's not really a decent usable way to even include task dependencies. So this is another way that the application lets you document your processes more thoroughly. And using other methods, there's also no way to keep dependent tasks hidden until all of the tasks they're dependent on have been completed. So this is also another one of the ways it puts your processes into a form that's far more usable. In the application, it makes absolutely no difference which members of an organization the dependent tasks and the tasks they're dependent on are assigned to. So if Mary can't complete a task assigned to her until Bob has completed a task assigned to him, then Mary's task won't show up on her task list until Bob has marked his task complete. Because of this, the task dependencies feature of the application actually becomes a form of communication between your team members. When Mary's task automatically shows up on her task list once Bob has marked his task complete, then Bob doesn't have to remember to call Mary to tell her that he's completed his task, and Mary doesn't have to keep checking with Bob to see if he's completed his task yet. This automatic and continuous communication helps your processes move along much more quickly, and that's actually another of the 8 ways that the application helps teams work together more efficiently. The third of the 7 features I want to talk about is delayed tasks. Delayed task allows you to set up tasks on the checklists so that they'll be deliberately delayed each time they're copied to the task list. Now, this is useful for things like periodically following up with a sales prospect at some predetermined time interval. These delayed tasks then won't show up on the task list of whoever they're assigned to until the day arrives when they actually do need to be done. I actually find myself using this feature in my businesses more often than I thought I would, and I think you may too. It too makes your processes more effective because your team members won't forget to do the things that they need to do a week or 2 weeks out. And their task lists are far more usable on a day-to-day basis because they don't have to keep reading through a long list of tasks that they don't need to do yet. And when a task does show up, they know that it's time to go ahead and do it. Delayed tasks and task dependencies can also be used together. If you put on a delay, if you put a delay on a task that's dependent on another task or tasks, then it will be delayed the specified number of days after the last task it's dependent on has been marked complete. The fourth of the 7 additional features I want to talk about is checklist branches. Checklist branches are where the application will basically lead your users in different directions on a process depending on things that they learn along the way. I have a property management company that manages rental property for owners, and when a tenant gives us a move-out notice, one of the first things we do is find out whether or not the owner wants to re-rent the property. If they do, then we do one set of tasks to put the property back up for rent. But if they don't, we do a different set of tasks. This can easily be automated in the application, and again, like pretty much everything else, checklist branches are set up on the checklists, so they become yet another part of the documentation of your processes. Again, more thorough documentation of your processes. Once the checklist branches are set up on a checklist, the average person using the application doesn't even have to understand how it works. All they have to do is answer a question. Does the owner want to re-rent the property? Yes or no? And the application then adds the appropriate tasks to the task list once they answer that question. Next, let's talk about checklist dates. That's the 5th of the additional features I want to talk about. Checklist dates are basically like milestones that you can tie tasks to. An example would be something like the scheduled closing date for a real estate transaction. Like everything else, checklist dates are set up on the checklists, not on the task list. So they too become part of the documentation of your processes. So when you set up a checklist date on a checklist, you're obviously not entering a specific date because that's going to be different each time you use the checklist. You're just setting up the checklist so that it will require the user to enter an appropriate date each time a copy is being made of the checklist. You can specify whatever text you want to display, asking your users to enter a date. In our example, that would be something like, please enter the scheduled closing date. And the application can then assign any of the tasks from the checklist based on whatever date the user enters for that copy of the checklist. And those tasks will then appear on the task list on the appropriate date. Of course, lead and lag times are possible, so if you want something to show up, say, 7 days before the scheduled closing date, that's very easy to accomplish. You can also have multiple checklist dates set up on a single checklist. In a real estate transaction, there are actually 2 important dates. There's the due diligence date and the closing date. I have real estate checklists set up that require the user to enter the appropriate dates for each of these, and then certain tasks from the checklist are assigned based on the due diligence date and others based on the closing date. Next, I want to talk about task classes. That's the 6th of the 7 additional features. Task classes are also set up and assigned to the tasks on the checklists, so they too become part of the documentation of your processes. And they provide a way for users to work more efficiently by grouping together and focusing on completing similar types of tasks, regardless of which project they're for, which copy of a checklist they came from, or even which checklist they came from. Examples of task classes I use in my businesses are things like website updates and accounting. So using another example from my property management company, I could have a task to put one house back up for rent on our website that came from a tenant move-out notice checklist, and another to take a house off of the website that came from a property has been rented checklist, and a third to add a new property for rent to the website that came from a new rental property to manage checklist. So these all came from 3 different checklists. But by assigning all of these tasks to a task class of website updates on the different checklists, I can easily filter the tasks on my task list to see only the ones with a task class of website updates. And then I'll see only these 3 tasks, no matter how many total tasks I had on my task list. So I could then go into my website software just one time and easily concentrate on completing all of the website updates, whether there's 1 or 3 or 10 or 100, mark them complete, and then move on to the next group of tasks. So this is clearly a far more efficient way to work, and you certainly can't do this using paper checklists. So what you end up doing is the website update for one house, and then going and doing several other things and going to another checklist, and then coming back to do another website update for another house, and then doing some other things before coming to do the third update for a website update for a third house. So you're constantly jumping from doing one thing to another, which is ridiculously inefficient, but yet this is how a lot of us work all the time. Next, I want to talk about recurring checklists. This is the last of the 7 features I want to talk about. This is for processes that need to be completed over and over again at some given time interval. So whether that's every X number of days, every month, or every year, the application can copy checklists for you automatically at whatever time interval you specify. So if you need to complete a given process, say at the beginning of each month, you would first create the checklist, just exactly like you would any other checklist. It's just a regular checklist. And then you would create a checklist recurrence, selecting the checklist you already created and specifying the time interval at which you would like the application to automatically copy that checklist for you. You can even create multiple recurrences of a single checklist. So say you need to complete a given process for each of your clients every month, you would just create the one single checklist for that process and then create separate checklist recurrences for each of your clients. And with each of those separate recurrences, copying the same checklist but for different projects. In doing this, you can also very easily have the application assign some or all of the tasks on the checklist to different members of your organization for each of the separate recurrences, each of your different clients. So if, for example, you had different salespeople or account managers assigned to work with different clients, you could very easily set up each of the recurrences to assign some or all of the tasks on the checklist to whichever salesperson or account manager is assigned to that client. So each recurrence can assign them to a different person. And then this would automatically happen for every copy of the checklist that was made. And the thing that makes this even cooler, if that's even possible, is that whenever you needed to make improvements to your process, you would only have to update the one single checklist, and those changes would then be reflected in every future copy of that checklist. So again, once we're documenting our processes more thoroughly, because now not only are we documenting our processes using all of the advanced features we've been talking about in this video, we're also documenting when and how often they should be done for each project. And we're making our documented processes more usable because the application is going to automatically populate our task list with these items on a scheduled time interval. So not only do our team members not have to worry about remembering all of the steps necessary to complete a given process, they don't even have to worry about remembering when and how often they need to start the process. So earlier I said that the application will allow you to document your processes in a way that's far more thorough and far more usable and far more effective than any other method out there. I hope now you can see that that statement is not only justified, it's actually an understatement. Think just for a minute about 2 things. First, bringing a new person into your organization and training them. How much easier and thorough would their training be if from day one new team members had a task list to work off of that was being populated by checklists that represented the years of cumulative experience of everyone in your entire organization? In a very short period of time, a new team member could be working like someone who's been there for years. Second, think about making changes to your processes. Whenever you make changes to a process, maybe adding new tasks, you basically tell everyone and you hope they remember. Maybe you tell them more than once. But how often do they forget? How much more effective would it be for you to simply add an item to a checklist and then have it show up on someone's task list every single time that it needs to be done? When you do that, you don't even have to tell them that you added it. It's just going to show up on their list. Lastly, I want to talk briefly about user training. That's always an issue whenever you're starting to use a new application, especially when you have a team of people involved. The main thing that you need to understand is that you probably only need one person in your organization who understands how to set up your checklists. Not that that's very hard, but it is a little more involved than just using the task list. Once your checklists are set up, the average person using the application doesn't have to understand how they're set up. They don't have to understand what task dependencies are going on behind the scenes, or which tasks are being delayed, or why, or how the checklist branches work, how the tasks are assigned to the different members of an organization. All they have to do is log into the application, complete the tasks that appear on their task list, mark them complete, and occasionally answer a simple question when they reach a checklist branch, if you're even using that feature, and possibly make copies of checklists. And that's about it. There are several training videos on YouTube already. Do a search for NetChecklist, all one word, and it'll definitely come right up. And there are 2 playlists. A playlist is a series of videos that you can kind of watch about a specific topic. For standard users who don't need to know how to set up checklists, see the playlist called NetChecklist Training Series for Standard Users. And for admins and others who need to be able to set up checklists, manage users, and do other slightly more advanced features and maybe understand more about how it actually works, they can see the playlist called NetChecklist Training Series for Administrators. So that's what the application does, and those are the features that I believe make it truly unique and that make it far more usable and far more beneficial than any of the alternatives. It's more usable and beneficial than using paper checklists. It's more usable and beneficial than using any of the other task management applications that are out there. And it's certainly more usable and beneficial than putting your processes into the form of a document that gets discussed in a couple of training sessions and then put into a binder and put on a shelf where it is promptly forgotten, and then just hoping that your team members will remember to do all of the things that are important to your organization. That's it. Thank